All right, hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, depending on where you are in this wonderful world of ours. My name is Tanya Sadowski. I am the program coordinator for the Global Engagement Department at the Community Solution Education System, and welcome to International Education Week 2024. We're very excited to have you all join us today, and we're very excited about today's event. Oh, Canada. For those of you interested, I did want to go over all of our upcoming events remaining for this week. We've had a couple already, which you can view on our YouTube channel. The videos of those are on our YouTube channel. Today, as you know, since you are here, we will be hearing from a panel of students from Canada who are studying at one of our locations, as well as from our Canadian International Liaison Officer about everything that is amazing about Canada and why you should want to study abroad there. Tomorrow, on Thursday, November 21st, we will be hosting our final information session for our upcoming Education Beyond Borders 2025 South Korea trip that's happening in the spring of 2025. If you have any interest in hearing more about that program and potentially joining us for this amazing opportunity in South Korea, please join us tomorrow for our information session. And then on Friday, our amazing week wraps up with another student panel. It's a study abroad panel from students and faculty who've studied abroad in South Africa, Germany, and Brazil. And our international liaisons from South Africa and Germany will also be there to tell you about their experiences and what it's been like to work with our students and faculty studying abroad. And of course, we do have our ongoing photo contest. Everybody is encouraged to submit their photos from your international experiences and travels. The more votes you get on your photos, the better, obviously. And whoever gets the most votes will get a chance to win a really cool little prize from our department. So with all of that being said, again, we hope that you join us on one of these amazing events for the rest of the week, but we will go ahead and get started with what we have got going on today. So first of all, I do want to introduce our panelists and who's going to be speaking to you. We do have, and if I butcher your names, I'm very sorry, Amina Arima and Herlena Vereich. Right? Okay. And then our international liaison from Canada, Sierra Hamagishi, sorry, Sierra. We are going to start off with our student panel, which I will be moderating. So welcome our super awesome students. If you wouldn't mind, please introduce yourselves to our audience, include your name, your major, where in Canada you're from, and maybe a little fun fact about yourself. I will go ahead and start with Herlena because she's on my screen.
Thank you, Tanya. Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Herlena, and I am currently at the Chicago School. I'm completing my doctorate in clinical psychology. And I guess a fun fact about me is, and it's not really obvious, but I am 6 feet tall.
Oh, I'm 5'4", so that's incredible. That's awesome. Well, welcome. We're very excited to have you here. Amina, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Tanya. Yeah, my name's Amina. I'm currently at University of Western States in Portland, Oregon, finishing up my last year of the Doctorate of Chiropractic program. I'm originally from Kelowna, BC in Canada. And a fun fact, I guess I think I still have a dual citizenship with Japan since I never really told them I was picking one or the other when I turned 22. So I guess that's a fun fact.
That's amazing. Dual citizenship is fun. Excellent. So we are very happy to have you both attending the Chicago School and University of Western States as international students. I'm sorry, my brain is like going nuts. What are you enjoying the most about your time in the US or at your respective institutions? So tell us what you are enjoying about being here. Amina, I'll start with you.
I really enjoy being in a bigger city because even where I did my undergrad in Alberta, it was like a very small town. So it's nice to kind of be in a bigger city environment. There's a lot of different food options that I've been enjoying in Portland and a lot of different coffee shops that I like to go study at. So I just always like kind of going to new cities and kind of exploring. So I've been enjoying my time doing that. And it's been nice being on the West Coast again and being only, I think, an hour and a half away from the closest coast town. in on the Oregon coast, so that's really nice. I like to go out to the coast a lot.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, the Pacific Northwest is stunning. That's awesome.
Yeah.
What about you, Helena? Tell us about your experience here, as an international student. What are you enjoying so far?
Yeah, I think I don't know if I mentioned, but I'm originally from Toronto, in Canada, and so I moved to Chicago for like school, and it was pretty cool. I think just a part of my program, I feel like I got to meet so many different people, which I think, and I have like such deep and close friendships with like so many folks from like so many different parts of just not the US, but like the world now, and I think, I don't know, I feel like I'm very relational and I really enjoy that. I think for my internship, I've moved to the Pacific Northwest actually, and I'm currently in Seattle. And I think I feel like it's pretty great to see like the opportunities that you get when you're just a part of like a program like the one I was in and or I'm in currently and loving the Pacific Northwest. I've never really been here before, so a lot to explore and see.
That's fantastic. Seattle's one of my favorite cities. Love it. So you're both in the Pacific Northwest and not that far from each other. That's pretty fantastic.
Yeah.
That's pretty great. So you mentioned, meeting new people and how much you enjoy that. As we know, it's not always easy to meet people. It sounds like you haven't had any challenges in that, but have you had any, or what sort of challenges, if any, have you had just meeting new people or making those connections? And what is it that you enjoy the most? You said you enjoy it, but what is it that you enjoy the most about meeting people from around the world while you study here?
I would say I think it's like being in a psych program, the biggest thing that I bring is curiosity to things, and I love to learn things about like just things that I don't know about.
Mhm.
And so meeting folks from all different walks of life just gives you so much perspective. And I think also like your ability to connect with people that you've never met before. And I don't know, it's just like this being an international student, you're thrown into an environment where you kind of like at first you're like doggy paddling and you're like, I don't know how to swim, I don't know what this is. And then slowly you're like, okay, like I'm starting to figure out this new system. I'm starting to build like supports for myself within the system. And then
Mhm.
and then finding opportunities like, work study positions and like getting to meet people through that and like gaining more experiences and competencies, like not just in like the field that I'm in, but like also from like a broader perspective, I think has been really cool.
That's great. Amina,
Yeah.
what about you? Have you had any challenges meeting new people or making connections? And what do you enjoy about meeting people from around the world?
Sorry, just technical difficulties again. I know maybe like a challenge personally for me was moving down. I actually had a lot of anxiety moving before like relocating just because I was used to always having stalker in a sense to kind of have like forced friends is what we said on the team because like you always just like have that bonding moment with like your teammates and it was the first time I was moving to a school without having that.
Mhm.
But it's interesting because you have so many people from like around the world or other Canadians in the program where I go to, and you're all kind of realize you're all panicking at the same time. So you kind of just bond together. I did have like a very good support group for like the majority of my time here. And I think for me personally, I'm more like shy and introverted. So it was a bit of a challenge for me to kind of step out of my comfort zone. But whenever you step out of your comfort zone, that's kind of like when you do like your most personal growth. So honestly, it's been nice for me to be constantly pushed out of my comfort zone. And because I've done soccer a lot, I just kind of like looked up like leagues I could have joined, and because I know like I'll be enjoying playing the sport, and then I knew that way I could kind of meet people outside of the program as well. So that's kind of what I've been how I kind of overcome my challenge, I guess.
Fantastic. And I know this will be controversial, but I think soccer is the greatest sport in the world. So that's awesome. Former player as well. That's awesome. Some college students, even domestic students, can really struggle with homesickness. You've kind of both sort of touched on that a little bit in the transition here. It can definitely be harder for those coming from a new country, into a different situation. If you would like, Would you kindly share your experience with homesickness or culture shock? I don't think a lot of people realize that there can be a culture shock between Canada and the United States. And I know, Armina, you've already talked about how you sort of overcome it with soccer, but what else have you guys done to overcome it? So what's your experience been like, and what have you done to overcome it?
Yeah, I've been living on my own for a while now. Like I think I was 17 when I first went to undergrad, so I don't really felt like as much homesickness unless something happened, like a family emergency, or if friends were kind of going through a really tough time, or my sister was going through a really tough time recently, and it really hurts that I can't physically be there in that sense. So even though it wasn't like maybe like necessarily like homesickness, that was definitely a challenge. But just having like a really good support group, like where you are, like whether you're in Chicago at the Chicago school or here in Portland, has really helped me, I know. And like I've definitely gone out on like walks and like just kind of get myself like doing the things that I know that helps me personally with my mental health in a sense. And then doing like a lot of like phone calls to home or like friends that are like long distance, because just having that connection where you know the people like know you really well and they're your people in your like life, it really helps with the homesickness and things like that. But I say that was probably like a biggest challenge because life is going to continue whether you're in school in the same country where you're from or whether you're international. So it's just a bit tough. But as long as you have a good support system and know how to cope with things, I think is a good thing to know.
That's awesome. Any big culture shocks that you experienced?
Um, Not so much. I don't know. I think for my program, like we are the biggest amount of Canadian students for my cohort. We're 50-50. So there wasn't too much of a culture shock for me in a sense. I know there's like certain little things where my American friends are like, oh, you call, like, I think we say marks or points, but they say grades here or something, like just like little things like that. They're like, oh, that's so weird that you guys say something different. And like, so just little things that I've noticed, but nothing huge with culture shock.
All right, awesome. That's great. Helena, what about you? Any experiences of homesickness or culture shock that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think like I want to echo Mina's kind of experiences. It was pretty similar at first, where it's like you're adjusting to a brand new environment and you're kind of bringing like all you have is yourself in a way, and you don't really know a lot of other people. So like for me, what really helped was having like that strong support system and like friends back home that I could reach out to, FaceTime, call whenever. And because of that, like not bad time difference between Chicago and Toronto, it was like doable, and they were a lot more accessible to me. But I think like as anything, as I started to adjust to the new environment, and I think like when you're in school, you have so many people in your classes. Like I think you're always busy. You have like you always have things to do. So I think distractions were a great way to kind of like take my mind off of like missing everyone at home. And I think like with time, you just get used to the new environment, and then you start building like your own network like that you can access like in real time, like in person. And I think like doing that transition in COVID might have been like, for me it was, that's what made it the most challenging. But then as I like was got more familiar with my surroundings, it started to feel a lot better. And when it comes to culture shock, I think like I feel like North America is pretty similar, but the general like, I don't know, it was just like Chicago was just a brand new city. I'd never like been like in terms of like living there and like actually like setting like in a way setting roots. And so like just getting familiar with like what are the norms around me? Like what are the things that people are into here? Like what are all these cool things that everyone's talking about but I have like no idea about, right? So like really just familiarizing myself with those things, and like taking advantage of just opportunities that present to kind of like go out and do things and try new things, and like like provide yourself those opportunities for growth. I think for me it was really great. I think one thing that like really helped me was that I found someone that was like in the program 2 years above me, and like she kind of became like just like an older sister, but then also kind of like a mentor, like someone that like already knew what, like how things worked and like help me transition into those changes and feel less anxious about them. Yeah.
That's great. That's really brilliant. I'm glad you were able to find somebody in your program that
Yeah.
you could go to. That's really great. I mean, Amina's got half
Yeah.
class, that she can hang out with. So that's great. So as an international student, there are a lot of factors that are sort of beyond your control or your university's control. Some things like getting a visa and things like that. As such, because of that, there are challenges, of course, in your educational journey that others may not be aware of or experience themselves in what it takes to study outside of their home country. If you wouldn't mind, please share, if you can, what it takes to attend school outside of Canada and what others may not be aware of in that journey and in that process.
Yeah, I think one of the great things about being a Canadian is that like the visa process is a lot more easier and accessible for us in comparison to like maybe folks that are coming from like a different continent.
Mm.
And so I think for me that took away so much of that anxiety. I think the paperwork that I had to fill out was pretty much in relation to this like one document called the I-20 that I'm like so familiar with now. But like initially when you're not as familiar, I feel like it's normal to feel anxious about it. But like for each program, like for me, like it was a pretty seamless process in terms of like we were told like all the documents that we do need to kind of like fill out to have access to that, right? What information is required, whether it's like proof of finances, like all these like nitty-gritty details. And like I feel like for the Chicago school, it was like the way it was structured was that like here's a list of things that you need, make sure you have them and like try to get them in by this date. And then once you get into like once you move into the home country, well, there's like a whole check-in process. So like there are all these forms that like are expected of you. And so that like I think for me having that awareness was so important because it's like when you don't like you're gonna be anxious about what you don't know. But then when things are provided to you in a very clear and concise way, you can like plan around them or plan for them. So I think, yeah, like I think that was really helpful from that perspective.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like it. That's great. Yay, Chicago School. Amina, what about you? What it is, if you wouldn't mind sharing what it takes to attend school or apply here, the process that people might not be aware of.
Yeah, I liked how University of Western States does a similar thing that Herlina already like kind of mentioned with like the checklist. Like they were very good at being like, this is the bullet point list that you need to do kind of for the forms. But as Herlina already touched base on, like the whole visa process is a lot smoother for us Canadians to go to the States than like you may think, as opposed to because technically we're international students, but then it's like a bit, it's nice since we were like bordering countries and like we're part of like North America in general. I would say maybe like my one advice is like for the visa process to get approved, at least there's like always like a dollar amount that you have like to provide proof of funding. And I learned afterwards that they're like you need to kind of fight for your loans in a sense, whether it's like with the province or even if you're doing like a line of credit through a bank. Really advocate for yourself and don't take no the first few times because it's quite a journey. And I wish I known that sooner. Just from like maybe like knowing like getting in touch with maybe like a mentor from the school would to like kind of do that. But that would be my one advice is like just don't take no, like advocate for yourself. The banks are always going to say no first, but I've heard from other classmates that if you push a little bit and like provide more proof that you do need a bigger loan, they will give it to you. So I think that's like a main thing that I would want to touch base on.
That's great. Things I wouldn't have thought of. Fantastic. And Herlena said in the chat, checking for grants. Definitely check for grants for your studies abroad or in another country or even in your home country. So just keeping on the subject of school, I think, Amina, you mentioned this earlier. You talked about how, we call them grades and you call them marks or whatever. Are there any other sort of differences in the Canadian education system versus the US education system that you guys have noticed that you've had to adapt to or that just are really like noticeable differences between the two?
Yeah, I would say maybe first for it's like a
Mm.
quarters instead of semesters. So like the length of time, especially in between programs, is like a bit different, and it's definitely more high pace with just the accelerated 3 year program for becoming a DC as opposed to the traditional 4 year. I would say that was like a bit of an adjustment. The grading process, I feel like was about the same, like with percentages wise when I like compare it back to like undergrad. So that wasn't too bad. There was one thing, I think the main thing that I know is just kind of like a little joke in like our friend group mixed with Americans and Canadians was the metric system
Oh yeah.
and like going from like Celsius to Fahrenheit or miles to kilometer, and everyone's like kind of going back and forth. And then like one friend's like, oh yeah, I ran like 3 miles, and us Canadians are like Googling like what's 3 miles? Like, so it's just like things like that. I think that was a little bit because also like learning or being taught some certain things in classes, like I definitely had to Google the conversion for things because I'm like, oh, I don't know off the top of my head how like far that is or how like long that is. So just
Yeah,
things like that.
that makes complete sense. Absolutely. Helena, what about you?
I feel like Amina just really like answered all of it. Is for me, it's like I still refuse. I refuse Fahrenheit. I will stay true to Celsius. And I but it's like it's little things like that that are like just a little unfamiliar. And I think once you just navigate your way around them, you it works out. Like I think once for me there was this thing of in Canada we have fuzzy peaches. Like they did not have fuzzy peaches in America for like years and years. And then one day, like I found fuzzy peaches and I'm like, oh, like maybe they finally had like they restocked or something. And I was like, after 2 years, they've restocked. And so I was like casually just like eating fuzzy peaches in class, and everyone was like, what is that? And I'm like, fuzzy peaches? And like, so it's like little things like that, like truly. And like those are the experiences that like on like for me like I then shared fuzzy peaches like with everybody in the class and with my professor, and it was like this moment. So it's like the little things.
Oh, that's great. And sharing the cultural differences and the little things here and there is I think, definitely an amazing part of being an international student and having those experiences. So my final question to the two of you, as an international student, as a Canadian student, do you think your classmates or anybody here had assumptions about you as an international student or as a Canadian student coming over? And did you have any assumptions about Americans and American students? Harleen, I'll start with you.
I think I don't know. Like I feel like everyone thinks like we're really, really nice like in Canada, or like we do say sorry a lot. And like I think there are things like that, like very like stereotypical things that I feel like people bring up, or but I think I don't know, like there wasn't something like that I can think of like that is very specific. I think when it comes to my assumptions, like I feel like the most obvious one was just like, okay, well, the elections and like the
Mhm.
political system here is very like it's different, right? And kind of from I don't know, for me from a mental health standpoint, like I had to bring awareness into that because all of my clients talk about those things. And like, okay, so what does that mean? Like what are all these like like I also didn't know how many like all the states and like all their names. Like there was some of that stuff that was just unfamiliar for me, that like once you start to familiarize yourself and you're like, okay, like it's just like learning something new that is unfamiliar, that over time as you stay somewhere and you see what's relevant or what's not relevant, it just becomes normal for you too. And but then as you flip flop, like I visit home when I can, so it's like now I have all this knowledge that maybe all my friends like don't know about there, right? And so like you can kind of share your wisdom too. So there's
Yeah,
things like
absolutely.
that.
That bridge between your Canadian friends and your
Yeah.
American friends. That's pretty cool, actually. Amina, what about you?
Yeah.
Any assumptions that you thought people had of you as an international student or a Canadian, and any assumptions about Americans or American students that you had?
Yeah, I think Carolina talked about most of the assumptions people have about Canadians, about us being nicer and just saying sorry a lot for things. I know when I first went to like a grocery store my first time in Portland. I was holding or someone held the door open for me and I just said thank you. And I would get sometimes like weird looks, or like if I like was like, oh sorry, I'm just gonna kind of get past you like in a tight aisle. Like some people would be like kind of looking and I'm just like, oh, I feel like I'm such like a sticking out like a thorn right now or something, just like stereotypical things like that. I think the only assumption I had was that the portion size was bigger in the States. I think was the only assumption I had. And then with like drink sizes too, it's like bigger sizes as well compared to the Canadian sizes back home. So like I think that's the only thing. Other than that, I know Herlina already mentioned that coming in with like a curious mind. Like I also came in with a curious mind. So I was just very open-minded to like learning about the American culture and like learning about my friends from other places around the world as well, like just keeping an open mind in that sense. So I didn't really have too many assumptions, but I would say, yeah, they all thought Canadians were just super nice.
Well, my experience is you are, so, you know, I've been to Canada. So I want to thank the two of you, if you don't mind hanging around until the end of the presentation, in case there are some questions for the two of you at the end. I am now going to turn it over to our International Liaison Officer from Canada, Sierra. Take it away.
Excellent. I'll do my best to represent. I know there's some other Canadians here, so we can back it all up and share stories. At the end, I will just share my screen. They have a couple slides today. All right, excellent. So, I mean, I know, like we said before, people like know some things about Canada in general, but today I was trying to focus on maybe at least having one new thing or some of the contrasts that there are between Canada and the US, because I know sometimes when we do study abroad, there's some people like, oh, they're so similar, like there won't be any differences, but I feel like there are some little nuances that you can discover between the two of them, which keep things interesting. All right. Excellent. And so just a little bit about myself first, just because I don't know if everyone in the system even knows that I've been here just over a year. I'm international liaison officer. I'm based in Vancouver. So a lot of us on, I guess, our extension, the Pacific Northwest side, and I have a lot of background in recruitment, partnerships, marketing, and American satellite campuses as well. And I had one of my own exchanges and I've lived abroad a couple of times before. So I resonate with a lot of what people were saying. That actually reminded me of a really funny story. When I was in school, I went on an exchange in Europe, and there was a lot of Lithuanians, and they in particular like, watched the show How I Met Your Mother, which used to be on TV, and it had a joke about Canadians being afraid of the dark, and they would always trick me about like being afraid of the dark, and I'm like, no, it's a fake stereotype. It's not a real stereotype. It's only that TV show. So your stories, both of you were sharing, reminded me of that, of like how the media can really affect our perceptions as well. So that's myself. And I just a little bit of an anecdote there. And then we also very recently, we have a lot of connection between all of the schools in the system and Canada, enough so that we have a full-time employee who's based in Canada and part of the system, Zhao Ying Hu, which a lot of you can meet at a future date, hopefully. She's just started. She's based right beside me. Burnaby is right beside Vancouver, Canada, and has a great background working with the American system, the Canadian system, American campuses, and she's also lived abroad in China as well. So I think she understands a lot of the differences and nuances that we'd be talking about today. So some people just like really high level. I think a lot of people know this, but sometimes there's little surprises that we're actually the second largest country by land. So there's a lot of land in Canada. And about 2024, we had about 38 million people, which for context is the same amount of people in California. So a lot less people and a lot more land, and most of us are quite near the US, where our largest population density is. So I just think it's something to consider that's different between Canada and the US there. Actually having two official languages, so having French as one of the official languages, didn't come up as much today, but if we had a student from Quebec, I'm sure they would have noticed a lot more things that were different between Canada and the US. Our GDP, I know not everyone, we don't know all the states. Not everyone knows that we have 10 provinces and then the 3 territories that are up there by Alaska. So just beside that. And then some of the major cities, and the Ottawa is our capital. That's just the high level. But I wanted to share just a couple of visuals about why to study in Canada. I realize because I'm screen sharing, I won't see the answers, but a couple of photos, if you know what it is and you're not Canadian, maybe you can guess and we'll see if there's some, and I'll reveal the answer really quick. But I think, as I mentioned, there's a huge amount of land. So there's beautiful landscapes like this one. I know you have a version as well. There's a bit of contested of the Canadian or American one, which one people like more, but I think something like Niagara Falls is where this is. You don't have to guess. You can guess in your head if you want, but I just wanted to show some visuals because I feel like those like photos speak 1,000 words.
If anybody guesses in the chat, I'll bring it up.
Okay, thank you. This one's a little lesser known, but it's a really beautiful experience. I haven't actually done, even though it is right in my hometown, but it's one of those things where like when a visitor comes, you will go to. I don't know if anyone knows where this is, but this is the Capilano Suspension Bridge. So you can walk over this. Capilano is a area that's right, like the mountain area is right beside Vancouver, but I actually haven't been to it yet. So it's one of those when someone comes and visits, then you check it out, kind of thing. And then another one is looking at the Northern Lights, the Northwest territories of Canada, but also in a lot of the northern parts of our provinces, because I mentioned most people live near the border. You can actually see the Northern Lights a good portion of the year as well. And then, as we know, we've all been getting to see Northern Lights like extra bonus times recently. Those are a couple of visual kind of enticements of why you might want to study in Canada. Because as I mentioned, there's a lot of open land because there's only so many people. So how much is just there completely untouched is, I think, something really special that we have to offer. If you want to, really be alone in nature or be alone somewhere, it wouldn't be as difficult to do because there's a lot less people than the US. And then this is a Canadian classic that I think will always be full with a lot of international students as well. I swear sometimes there's more international students than there are Canadians, depending where you are. But you'll get a lot of like Canadian comfort classic food here. So this is Tim Hortons, which is sometimes featured. I know it's slowly moving into the US, other places in the world, but I think for any international students that study abroad in Canada, you've probably been here at one point and had the famous, they're called Timbits. They're like little donut holes, but they're called Timbits. So that's one of the little nostalgic pieces or rites of passage. One of my friends, she lives in the UK, but she studied abroad here, and I'll like bring her, they have like a French vanilla coffee, and I'll break it to her and she'll be like, oh, tastes like university and studying in the hall. So it's just one of those things where like, McDonald's or something where it tastes the same every time. So it could be that little comfort piece that you could look forward to if you wanted to come study here. And a lot of people know this one, but just in case you hadn't seen it for some reason, that's poutine. We don't have a lot of Canadian foods that are just Canadian. I feel like this is one of them, which most people know. And then this is one that I feel like not everyone knows what it is. Maybe not even all Canadians, because I think it came from more the west side of the country. But these are called Nanaimo bars. Nanaimo is a city that's on Vancouver Island. And it was like invented there by a woman, I think at a bake sale. And so the bottom part is chocolate and coconut, and the top part is kind of like I don't know, a buttery cream, I guess you could say. And then there's a layer of chocolate on top. So that's one of the few little differences that I don't think them the Nanaimo bars in the States. I know that some people might play around with poutine, but I think this one is just in Canada. And then on a higher level, like if you are, I know there might be some faculty here or students that are thinking of their program or how they might do different levels of research. And so there are definitely some contrasts. As I mentioned, there's the language. And because of that, like officially everything in Canada has to be written in French and English, even if it's not just in Quebec. So if you buy any product here, you'll notice it's written in both languages. And that's even interesting when you get into certain like business or companies, like if you're going to write marketing, if you're going to like have an ingredients label, you can't just have it in English. So that's why I feel like some companies don't want to export to Canada right away because the population size is only so big and you have to do all this work to put everything in French as well. Where in the US, it could be just in English. So that's one piece. And then as opposed to the US, where you have a presidential system, we have a parliamentary system with the prime minister. So it's always funny. I find that Canada sometimes has some things that are more British and some things that are more American because of our proximity and our history. And a lot of people don't know. I feel like every Canadian knows this word because you use it you learn it in social studies in school, which is constitutional monarchy. But most Americans are probably like, what is that? It's kind of like an honorary recognition, which we still have to this day of what used to be the Queen and is now King Charles. So we still recognize them. We haven't completely let go of our British roots. And that's versus the presidential system. And so we still have the Queen on most of our money, but they are starting to print some of King Charles on our money as well. So just little things like that. And our money has multiple colors and things that looks more like the UK. And we talked a couple of these, but I just wanted to point out some more little nuances of like how we borrow from both, or sometimes we're confused of which one we want to do. We're not even as strict about it. So we take a lot of like British spelling, which is one we didn't talk about. So maybe when you guys are writing essays, you might have noticed this too, if you get a lot of spell check if you're not in the right one. So we add all the extra U's that they do in the UK to words like labor and neighbor. That's how I want to spell them. Any Americans looking at that are probably like, change that. And then I never remember which one is which, but I feel, and other Canadians can correct me, I almost interchangeably use Z and Z, the last letter of the alphabet. And one is definitely the way Americans like it, and one is the British one. So there's just little, both, I think, language differences. And then the spelling one is huge because, again, when you're speaking to people, when you're writing an email, when you're, depending on what kind of practice you have or what kind of thing you do in the future, it's good to know that when the spell check thing is coming up, that there is actually other ways that they do things. And we did talk about the metric system, and I would agree with like as soon as you cross the border, the speeds are in kilometers, the temperature's in Celsius. But I feel like because it happened when, like for myself, like kind of my parents' generation, we're actually a little confused about it. Because as you notice, even in the opening, even though we're in the metric system, when we speak to each other, we still say feet. Like when we opened today, we said 6 feet. We didn't say that in centimeters. So the weird thing is that the only place that they'll say centimeters and kilograms is your license. And it'll probably be really updated because it's what you guessed at when you were 19. And if anyone asked you that, or you were talking to someone European, you'd probably be a lot more confused about it. So like we have a meter stick in school, but then we know our height in feet, and then we don't like Fahrenheit, but these other things, we're a little confused as a country. And it seems to be, it's quite common. It'd be very rare to have anyone tell you the full metric. So it's kind of funny how we've held on because we did. Yeah, we're just that in between the British and the American piece. So those are some fun quirks and things to think of. And then just again, if you were thinking about planning a kind of a thesis, or you were looking at making a study abroad program here, of course, there are still challenges that we face in Canada specifically as well. I know we said, there's nice and everything seems great, and like we don't talk about them a lot, but there are definitely specific societal issues that we're working through as a country, some of them being like Indigenous reconciliation. So there's a lot of efforts, and this is on the news commonly, about historical injustices that happened or inequalities that are being faced even today by Indigenous peoples. And we do have a large amount of population. And we actually have a lot of nuances you would notice too. There's a lot of very active like national rules about reconciliation, and controversial, and how, some people have different opinions on the benefit or not. But for any school ceremony, any official government ceremony, a lot of emails, there'll always be a recognition of the people's land that we're on and who it's from. And so you learn the names, and that is like 100% that would happen at any grad ceremony, any government thing, even a lot of meetings that have a large amount of people. So just one nuance. I know that might happen in areas of the states, but I don't believe it's ever like federally or state regulated to do that. And then healthcare, we do have a universal healthcare system, but there are a lot of challenges in that. There are some wait times. And then as we talked about, a lot of people are concentrated to some areas, but there are a lot of rural areas where access can be very difficult because you're having to put a lot of money into a system where there's only a few people. So there is definitely issues with access when you have that kind of system and the way that our population is spread around. And then also, like everyone, climate change, we have a lot of natural resources, like I said, but because of that, there's a lot of extraction of that, as well as greenhouse gas emissions and things that we're all facing. So there's a bit of push-pull of how to make our economy stronger, but then also how do we protect our beautiful environment. I think that's one thing to point out too. The US economy is like $1.41, like 2 days ago when I looked at Canadian dollars. So if you do come up here, your currency will go really far right now. So I think that's one thing to note. The other two things that we're looking at is affordable housing. I think that a lot of people face this with like real estate prices, rental costs, particularly in the major cities like Vancouver, Toronto. But Vancouver is a very special city in this, if anyone's ever looking at doing a program, because we have quite like out of this level high pricing for real estate, like something like San Francisco almost, but our wages don't recognize that. So it's kind of like there's an even bigger gap because the salary bands, even across the country, won't recognize that. Like, even in my mid-career, I actually moved to Toronto because I'm like, oh, well, I can have more kind of upward mobility and how much I'm able to make. And then the housing kind of costs the same and I still have access to a big city. So there's little quirks like that. Everyone wanted to live in Vancouver just because it's so beautiful, but then there's only so many spots and there was a lot of foreign investment. So interesting things to think about. And then finally, we do have a very large amount of immigration as well as refugees. So there's a lot of balancing that and then providing the relevant like support and integration that we do to properly, support those newcomers. So those are just some things to think about. I want to move into questions because I want to end on a high note. As I said, there's a lot of good things in Canada, but I think there's also a lot of interesting nuances to think about where we're not exactly like the US. It said sometimes we're like the US and the UK, and then sometimes we have our own version of things that we created ourselves. So I think on like a social, cultural, economical, even looking at the geography, if you were going to open, a lot of people be practice-based and it's like, do you do a more rural one? Do you have a more city one? So a lot of things to think about. That's everything I have, and I'll pass it back to you, Tanya.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sierra. This was great. Thank you so much. I'm now going to open it up to anybody who has questions for any of our participants today or any comments. Feel free to put things in the chat or unmute yourself or raise your hand. Jump in. It looks like you answered everybody's questions today. Well, thank you again so much to all of you for being here. This was wonderful. Really appreciate it. And as I mentioned at the beginning, please join us for the rest of our events for International Education Week. And have a great rest of your week, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great week. Take care. Bye.